Hello and welcome to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum, Reduce, Reveal, and Secure. My name is Lindsay with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. Also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we will have time set aside for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Rick Doughton. We're excited to have Rick for his opening keynote presentation entitled Threat Intelligence, Build a Better Threat Hunting Roadmap. Welcome, Rick. Over to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Very happy to be here. Very honored to be the kickoff to this forum. Real excited about this topic. It's one that I don't talk about a lot, but one I have a lot of experience with. And so what I want to get started with is talking first about what intelligence is. We've heard about threat intelligence. We heard about intelligence feed. We talk about threat feeds. But at the core of it, intelligence is, collecting, analyzing, processing, and applying data. And I'm going to go into some examples of what that is. And when we talk about intelligence communities and different parts of the world and different countries, what they're doing is doing some collection, doing some analysis, kind of deriving information from it. And so when I talk about that, there are 5 types of intelligence. And this is not relevant to most cybersecurity folks, but just kind of as an example. There's human intelligence, which is like watching literally what humans are doing and deriving from their actions information that can be used to make decisions. Signals intelligence, which is where we're listening to things over the air, over the network, of different types of things. Imagery intelligence, we're looking at pictures that may be taken from planes or satellites. Measurements and signal intelligence, where it might be certain types of side channel things that might be happening. And then open source intelligence, which is literally just kind of like Googling stuff or things that are already they're already public, but piecing these together to be able to come up with certain types of information that might be usable. Within gathering intelligence, there's different, you got to plan about what you're going to do, what you need to collect, what answers you want to try to get into. Then we do the collection. And as I kind of described before, there are many ways to collect it. Typically, in a cyber standpoint, most of it's open source intelligence, might be from intelligence feeds, might be from providers, might be from information sharing forums, might be from your friends. And then we analyze that data to see like what's relevant, deduplicate it, define like what is useful to us. And then we produce some kind of intelligence report or product out of it that then gets disseminated to people to help them make decisions. And again, I'm kind of going through this 101 very quickly just to understand the concept, because it's not just, hey, I'm going to get something, I'm going to put it into my tools, and that's intelligence. And then finally, we talk about different characteristics and attributes of data. And so when we're doing this data collection, there could be concerns about the accuracy, the completeness of it, the reliability of the source, the relevance to us, the timeliness. Is this data like current, or is this data that is something from that might be from, 2 weeks ago, that might be relevant, or years ago, and who knows. And then the attributes of the data that has these characteristics. There could be a lot of it. We're concerned about the volume of the data, the variety of data and different sources, which may be a plus or a minus. If you're looking at something that's very specific, you may want, a variety of a specific source of that data and ignoring all the other sources, or you may prefer to have this kind of crowdsourcing variety of data. And then finally, my favorite one, which is called velocity. And velocity is kind of, how fast is this coming? How fast is the data changing? How fast is this, are you able to consume it? And so these are all things that you manage when kind of doing a threat intel, kind of program. And so I wanted to just kind of start with this primer of what it is to kind of as the baseline of what I'm going to talk about when I get into some of the meat of the topic here. So I came up with these 4 things. I guess, well, anyway, but 12 years ago, I was at Lockheed Martin, part of the Defense Industrial Base, intelligence driven cybersecurity response was a very big thing then. And so when we were trying to educate other organizations in finance and energy and oil companies on leveraging intelligence for information to be able to support cyber actions, we realized that not everyone is at the same maturity level. We're dealing with the US intelligence community, we're dealing with other nation intelligence communities, and we're dealing with our other partners in defense industrial base, that live and breathe this stuff and are very active. And so, but when we talked with folks in other organizations saying, hey, here's this great concept of using intelligence to enrich your security operations, we realized that some of them, that even if we gave them intelligence, they wouldn't know what to do with it. They have no way to take it and apply it to either their strategy, their controls, or protections or detections. They're like, okay, good to know. I'll look out in case I see anything. And so we kind of call them spectators. The next level of maturity are these consumers, where they say, I got it. You give me some indicators, you give me some context, let me understand who these threat actors are. I'll put it into my controls. Thank you very much. This is very helpful. And then we get to contributors who may, based on those consuming intelligence, may be able to derive other things from it and say, hey, let me share this out with the community. And so, for instance, like the ISACs here in the US, from healthcare and financial and all the different critical infrastructures, we would sometimes share as intelligence, share these things to help our peers, that maybe when some threat actor is, kind of sniffing around the neighborhood, hitting our friends before they get to us, and if they let us know about it, that may be a good thing. And then finally, the highest level, which is intelligence source, where someone who is taking all of the things that, whether the methods I discussed before or some that I'm going to talk about, and then deriving intelligence products to be able to share out either to their community or to the public or privately within their organization. And that's like intelligence source. So one of the things that an organization needs to first define is like, where do I A, fit in this hierarchy, and B, where do I want to be? Because ironically, back 12 years ago, when talking to some of these large institutions, they're like, I just want to be a consumer. I don't care about like deriving things or doing stuff. And then, you know, they kind of got over that a few years later when they realized the value of trying to leverage this. So I guess my bottom statement there, intelligence is only relevant if it's actionable. So how do we make this actionable? And so the purpose of intelligence to be proactive. So when I talk about how we use it today, oftentimes how organizations think they're using intelligence today is really reactive. So whether you're applying patches based on known vulnerabilities or exploits, whether you're taking IOC's indicators of compromise that may be derived from some other, source, saying, hey, I saw this actor, this is what they did, this is the IP they came from, and I, put that in your tool to block it or track it, or applying rules based on certain behaviors. These are reactive, kind of based on, you know I could call it intelligence, but this is not like what I really, from a formal standpoint, call intelligence. I really call them these indicators. These are all indicators or actions or TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures of certain threat actors that I might be able to apply. When we really get into like full form intelligence, which is I'm going to give an example of in a minute, it should inform our strategy and make us more proactive. It should prioritize our protections and detections in our roadmap. So these are questions that we're asking, such as, who are the actors? And I took out a slide that talked about attribution because I didn't have time for it, but there was many different debates about whether or not attribution is important, who it is, why they're doing this, what are their opportunities, capabilities, and intents. I won't kind of go into that other than what I talk about, but are they targeting our industry? Are they targeting us? Are they targeting us because of our industry or our size or our location? What is the confidence level that we have that they're actually targeting us and that they're really after us and that they're being successful? That are there actually exploits occurring at this kind of indicator that we see? It's like, are they really, yes, there's a new vulnerability, but is it really being exploited yet? Do we have intel on that? And so therefore we want to come up with, how likely is this going to happen, again, to inform our priorities? And does this overall change or adjust our protections and detections or our strategy? And so where over the last few years, ransomware became a lot more important, because it was a very active, and very effective way for the adversaries to make money and compromise organizations. And so that informed our strategy of many organizations to be able to say, all right, well, let's make sure I have good backups, make sure those backups are separate, make sure I'm protecting the credentials of those backups. Let me make sure that I have insight into keeping my data, I'm sorry, my platforms up to date, the hygiene of of my systems, making sure they're patched and make sure configuration management is good, because these are not exceptional exploits. These are just, rattling doorknobs looking for people who made mistakes. And so those are kind of things that help inform us to be a little more proactive. So I'm going to walk through some examples of like going from data to intelligence. And so this will come clear when I talk about like where people kind of fail in this. And that is, if someone just says, hey, here's an IP address. And this is something, unfortunately, a lot of, you know, federal, back in the day, 10 years ago, federal information sharing, so we say, hey, here's an IP, make sure you block it. Like, well, that's not enough context, to be able to do it. What am I blocking it from? So it's like, okay, well, here's an IP that's targeting weak RDP connections. Okay, great. So that tells me, let me go see if I have any RDP exposed, and maybe I'll block this IP from trying to connect to us, if nothing else, over that port. And then I might learn more that, okay, this belongs to a Russian hacker group that's known as an access provider. And so access providers are usually the groups that do the first foothold. And that might be their role in this kill chain of just saying, all right, well, this is a group that has some good exploits, or sniffing around, rattling doorknobs, and they get in and they get access. And then they may sell that access to, to others. And we may say that, okay, this is a hacker group that's, from this IP that's going through RDP after a specific healthcare industry, because as we have seen in the press, healthcare is a very popular target for ransomware, because usually the smaller providers don't have the systems and the resources to be able to keep the hygiene up, and they make them weak targets. And then this group works with four other access consumer teams. And so we have the access provider who gets in and then sells it to access consumers. And here are some examples of some, known access consumers. Most of these are ransomware actors, which are biggest ransomware actors. I kind of said that there. As I look at them, I started like getting ahead of myself. And so we're learning a little bit more. So we're now kind of getting into what really is intelligence and not just indicators. And then we also are learning we may be able to learn more that these teams are known to target backup systems first and corrupt your ability to restore. And so that may inform me to, as I said before, separate my backups, control my credentials, make sure that these are be able to do this. And then you may find that, learn that these teams are known to exfiltrate sensitive data and extort you that way. So it used to be, even 3 years ago, that ransomware was enough. I'm going to encrypt all your stuff, give me money, and you'll get it back. And mostly because people wouldn't have good backups. And so backups actually were a good recovery standpoint for that. Knowing that they're onto us, and they're knowing they want to they increase their ability of getting paid, they start going immediately when they get a foothold. So let's see if I can corrupt the backups, let me take over their credentials, let me see if I can disrupt it. And so, which was the first step. And the second step is, let me go find data and exfiltrate it first, so that even if you are say, that's okay, I have backups, I don't need you, it's like, well, I already stole your data and I'm going to post it publicly, so you're paying me to not post it publicly. Oh, and if you don't pay me to, at least, for the ransomware event. And then here's some kind of evidence about like how successful are they. So these particular actors are 76% successful at preventing ransomware. And then like my little italicized is like, okay, going back to the relevance, timeliness, confidence of the source, and things like that. This is collected from a source with high confidence within the last 7 days, and information about the incident firm that, investigates these kinds of things. So I have high confidence that this is accurate and timely data for me to help in making decisions to say, you know what, let me look at my ransomware protection profile. So this kind of is the evolution. And honestly, I could like talk about this, that over the last 10 years we may have been accepting with like number up to 3 and call that intelligence, and now we're like letting more and more as we mature this. So why organizations struggle to manage intel, and this is for my friends over at NISOS, is a survey that they did, is, it's not specific enough. Like, remember that IP, it's like, hey, here's an IP that's going after RDP coming from Russia. Okay, do I care about that? You know, and then there's over dependence of machine learning and AI, meaning like they're expecting this machine learning to know these things and ingest these things. And so, they're like, and obviously it's not going to work. That's a whole other presentation. So let's, just rely on these that claim that they're taking the intelligence feed and storing, we're protecting you, and don't worry your pretty head about it. Then there's the too much data. Remember I talked about the volume and the velocity, that sometimes there's so much stuff coming in that organizations don't know how to manage it and they can't consume it. They can't deduplicate it, normalize it, define, discover what's important to them, and then be able to apply it. Context to make it actionable, as I talked about before. Not all threats are covered. Too many alerts, and I guess very few people think that everything is cool. Because one of the other things about relevant to you is that, I was a virtual CISO for 5 years before I came here 3.5 years ago, and different parts of the world. And the threat actors going after folks, targets in Latin America are very different than the ones here in the US. Even the Canadian ones are a little different. Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe, all have somewhat different actors. And so if you have a traditionally US based intelligence source that is giving you data, it may not necessarily apply to you because it may be biased towards US based targets. And so having ones that define specifically regionally, these are actors known to target these particular entities areas, is much more relevant, to your environment. And so here are some sources. I just kind of threw together literally off the top of my head. Recorded Future is kind of like the biggest. You pay for it. It's not necessarily cheap, but it's very, very popular. And it's a source. When we start getting down to like the Palo Alto Unit 42, it's a paid service and also some free information. NISO, so I kind of referenced before. I figured I'd give them a shout out since I used their slide. They have some. Again, they can be a paid source or they can be someone who has blogs and activity, and they have a newsletter that they do. Same with Intel 471. And then we kind of get into some of the news sources, such as Krebs on Security, Belief in Computer Security Affairs. Sometimes these are, investigative reporters who get information collected that can turn into intelligence sources. Checkpoint Research is another one similar to Recorded Future. Some people have will pay them for service, and sometimes they have things. Oh, my first question came up. What's the most plausible fix for businesses that are struggling with too much data, hiring more, keyword sorting? Yes, I guess it's the figuring out how to best normalize and figuring out which sources is getting you the best data. And then the last thing, like CISA is down there from the federal government. And so, you know, how you're ingesting it. So if you're doing it in an automated sense, then if you don't have a way to consume it and normalize it and be able to analyze it and in a rapid way to find it, then you're just drinking literally from a fire hose, which I hate that expression, but it actually fits this time. And then so I would say kind of limit the ones that you find are the most effective. And so you may have a multiple different sources, and maybe just like the emailing list from the ISAC in your industry might be like the most effective things. Kind of start with that to start refining and maturing your process to be able to scale it. And then, maybe from that ISAC, you start doing automation with like Sticks and Taxi for indicators, and that might be helpful. Or you might be able to try to script things out. There is some natural language processing that you can use. I don't want to talk about chat gtpt because there's there's bias to that platform, but that's another example of being able to have things that kind of read it and to derive things to be able to get it to a human to make a decision. But it's an excellent question. It's kind of a challenge. That's something that you're going to have to kind of deal with yourself. But I would say my first step is limit my number of sources. If I'm getting just a high velocity of data coming in, then that would be my first thing. So for me, and I'm on a podcast, been on a couple of podcasts talked about threat intelligence, easy to look up. And I always say like the best sort of intelligence is your own environment, because that's where you start. Who is targeting you? What are you seeing? And then use external sources as validation. It's like, hey, is anyone else seeing this? Now, I won't get into whole counter terror intel fat boy. When we were in the defense industrial base, we were very conscientious about how we shared what we were seeing with, because we didn't want the adversaries to know that we knew that they were here, and that they knew because they saw any remnants of protections in our peers that would indicate that, oh, we were sharing it with them and that's why I can't get in. But that's a whole like high level, very, very mature counter intel kind of concept. I would say that look at what's targeting you. What are you seeing day in, day out? Is it commodity or is it targeted? And that's really that for most organizations who are still on the spectator side or maybe consuming, if nothing else, just when we talk about attribution, just know, is this somebody throwing spaghetti at the wall? and they're looking to round doorknobs to see if they get in which you'll be treat differently? Or is this someone who's actually targeting you and have specific goals in mind? Because you're going to behave very differently. And they will be much more persistent. They will be much more precise. They have no more information about you, and they will target very specific people. So when I see, actors coming in, who are they targeting? Are they like targeting someone that's like, ooh, they know what this person's role is. So they obviously been studying. So this is targeted. So if nothing else from attribution, is it targeted or is it commodity? Um, what is getting by your detections? Another question: where do you think CISOs and cybersecurity leaders make the biggest, most costly errors when considering threat intelligence? That's an excellent question, because being wrong and like, buying a threat feed and expecting it to work and then having it fail because you have a process that it feeds into, is probably the biggest, the you know the biggest mistake. Is kind of like, technology supports a process, data supports a process, having a goal of what decisions you want it to support. And these are usually business decisions, knowing what threat actors are after you and what they're looking for, helping inform the business to say, let's prioritize our defenses, these are business decisions, not necessarily technically decisions. And so I think just, the biggest, um, you know, uh, error that I see is just people just like, hey, I'm going to either blindly take all of this intel and I'm going to put it in my tools to apply to protections and detections, or I'm going to take like too much data, which then, too much data can be confusing. It can be, contradictory to things. And it also, the other thing I would say, as mentioned before, it can be taking in data that's not relevant to you, and you're putting all this data that's not relevant, which is kind of overloading your systems. The next question is like defining what threat intelligence is and what it's not. Can you talk a little bit more about the key strategies and solution to building sensible threat intelligence posture? Um, not in 5 minutes, but these, because I only have 30 minutes to kind of talk about a topic that really would be like a whole semester class. And those people, like, I know one of my, old colleagues who was my threat intel analyst, who's I think listening in from Toronto, can tell you, it's like, this is a months or years per discipline to kind of learn how to do and to do well. But at least, if you are seeking it out, there's lots of good resources that if you kind of just do searches for, they can talk about set it. And there's classes around threat intelligence programs. But it's really starting with the number one thing is, what do you want to get out of it? Because you can't articulate that I need to this and to inform my security strategy and my protections, as an example, other than, hey, I'm going to use this to put in my tools. The I reference a Sun Tzu Art of War, because my next slide is when we talk about like the takeaways, since I know I have 5 minutes left. The uh Art of War, very, everybody usually like, 20 years ago, every security person had like an Art of War quote on their, on their slides. And so I'll just kind of socialize that my favorite one referencing that was like, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you will succeed in more battles, in all your battles, as opposed to if you know yourself but don't know your enemy, or if you know your enemy, you don't know yourself. And so this is where knowing thyself is important. What are my weaknesses? What are my targets? What would people want after me? What are my capabilities to identify, and recover and respond and recover very quickly? Because I need to work on those first before trying to get information about who my adversaries are. And I need to be comfortable with what I'm capable of doing, because I may get data from adversaries which may reveal to me I am not protecting myself the way I think I am. Or I may, because if I don't know that, I may say, oh, this adversary is doing this thing. I got that covered, but you don't. So learn what intelligence is, go study up and kind of understanding it, learn your environment. Well, I have it in blue. Actually, I have it in blue because I didn't know how to not make it blue because of the template. Anyway, build relationships within providers. So a lot of times, some of the best intel I get is from my peers. Here in Charlotte, we have a really strong CISO community. We talk about different things, joining your ISACs, whether you're whatever industry you're in. Almost all industries have ISACs. And so getting involved with that. If you're part of the InfraGard, they have some good intelligence and different industry specific focuses as well. But just, if nothing else, kind of learn, hey, what are you seeing? Then you can kind of evolve to, if you can afford it, getting these intel sources, and feeds, and these organizations, like, Recorded Future, or CrowdStrike or others, and Nisos and others that have like feeds that they can provide you, and even they will help you target and normalize. Hey, I just want to know more about these certain things, but build relationships with these peers, including CISA, including some of the public ones, and then determine where you fit in the maturity level to be able to say, do I want to just consume it and be able to get it and get a little better before I start getting up to that level? And then how to ingest and apply it. Because as I said before, technology supports a process, data supports a process, and intelligence supports a process first. So get that process in, start small, and then start expanding both the capability and the scale of what you can do. And I think I'm down to 2 minutes. So if any other questions, I'm feel free to, yep, and that's my last slide, right? Um, thank you. So yes, I'll pause here for any other questions I have. That went really fast, but I think I breathed a couple of times while doing all this. But hopefully this education reunion was a great kickoff to be able to start this great forum and a lot of great other sessions that I have seen, and some of my peers and colleagues and friends of mine that I know are speaking. But if you have any other questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about cybersecurity that's very easy to find. And yeah, otherwise, have a great day and have a great conference.
Thank you again, Rick, for an excellent keynote. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.